Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I know so many of you struggle with, and that is, what do you do when your child, teen, young adult won't get the mental health treatment they need? They just can't do it. And I know a lot of you are struggling with just how to navigate your child's mental health struggles with your family and your home, maybe your partner, your other kids. And so I'm really excited today to bring in really the go-to person on this topic. He has been around forever. I don't want to make him sound old. He is just, he's one of those, in my mind, in my like OCD community mind, he's like one of those legends. And he's recently written a book. I'm talking about Dr. Alec Pollard, who is amazing and is the founding director of the Center for OCD and Anxiety-Related Disorders in St. Louis Behavioral Medicine Institute. He is a professor and he is a licensed psychologist, and he has a special interest in studying the treatment of individuals with anxiety and emotional disorders who refuse or otherwise fail to benefit from evidence-based treatment, which really is the struggle that so many of us experience. He's the co-developer of the Family Wellbeing Approach, FWBA. I was fortunate to have him be one of the researchers who taught my advanced training in the BTTI through IOCDF. So I've seen him teach. I've been part of his teaching, and he was one of the ones that really stood out for me, as far as like, I get what he's saying and I love his approach. So I'm so excited that he actually wrote a book for those of you in the trenches, because so many times you get these gems, these researchers and therapists that are like pioneers in the field, and they write, no offense to those people, but they write kind of dry journal articles and research, or they write like a handbook manual, and you, the parents who are out there, never get access to those things firsthand. Maybe your therapist reads it, but he wrote a book with lots of other people actually, When a Loved One Won't Seek Mental Health Treatment, How to Promote Recovery and Reclaim Your Family's Well-Being. And that piece is something that doesn't normally get highlighted. What about your family? What about their well-being? What about your well-being? The family becomes disordered when we have a child with a mental health struggle. And so he co-authored it with some other people. Some of his co-authors are Melanie Van Dyke, Gary Mitchell, Heidi Pollard, Gloria Mathis, Gail Steketee. So I didn't want to leave anyone out. But I really enjoyed my conversation with Alec today, because we go into a lot of the things that you guys are experiencing, and those real rough situations where you feel like you're trapped and there's no way out of this vicious cycle. I just love his approach, and that there's always wiggle room for help. And I think he's really also the pioneer in helping the family, that this is not happening in isolation. We are struggling as family members with what to do. And how often are we turned away by therapists who say they only work with the person that is struggling? And so often we have nowhere to turn, because that's why I created my community, to be honest, because where are you supposed to go when your child, teen, young adult, older adult, whatever, your loved one is not willing to or able to seek mental health treatment, or they're just not in a place, and the family dysfunction is destroying everybody. And I love that he also offers solutions like, we can help the family. Let's help the person that is willing and wanting and needing the help. So I think you're going to really enjoy our talk. Before we jump in, though, I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S., thankfully. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is a right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com, That is treatmyocd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Also, if you're listening to this in real life time, today is Tuesday, and Thursday, my free series, Survival Tools for Parents Raising Kids with Anxiety or OCD, will start. And so if you have been wanting to know where to begin, and this is actually a great episode to come out this week, because I feel like what he conveys in this talk that we have is that there's always a place to start to help the family. There's always a place to start to even help your loved one. We just have to know where it is. And his book definitely gives you a roadmap of what to do and how to do it and where to start. And this free series actually kind of complements that as well, where we talk about where is your child at right now? Where are you at right now? And what things do we need to focus on? So the idea of this free series is to give you a roadmap of, like, to take an assessment, like not literally, but to assess yourself and say, what's going on with me? What's going on with my child? And what do I need to focus on? One small goal at a time. And that might mean, focusing on your ability to get more information about OCD and understand it. It might mean that you're going to work on your relationship and communication and trust with your child. Or it might mean you're going to set up exposures and you're going to start creating a therapeutic home environment in order to help your kids, because that's really the goal, is regardless of whether they go to therapy or not, if that therapeutic home environment is not solid, which is what Alec Pollard talks about really and what he's trying to help with, if that therapeutic home environment is not, I just hit my watch, I'm sorry, established, then everyone's going to struggle. So sign up. You can sign up at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Also grab his book, When a Loved One Won't Seek Mental Health Treatment. I will leave a link to his book as well. Super good. All right, well, without further ado, here's my interview with Alec Pollard. Well, I want to welcome Alec Pollard to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
It's my absolute pleasure.
I'm excited because I feel like you are the go-to person to talk about, well, I was going to say treatment resistance, but you have a better name for that.
Treatment interfering behavior or recovery avoidance.
Recovery avoidance. That's, I was like, my brain is not even working this morning. I was like, what is that word that he uses that is just such a nicer term? Recovery avoidance. And for the parents out here who listen, they really do struggle with their kids not wanting to get mental health support. I mean, that is like the number one issue that I see. And to be honest, it's the one that's really hard to navigate, to give advice to, because parents are kind of like, I don't know what to do. Like, he's holed up in the bathroom or he's in his bedroom and really will come out and eat. And then he goes back to his bedroom. And that's why I was excited to have you here, because I think we need more resources to support families who are literally hijacked by OCD in their home. So before we jump into that, maybe I did introduce you, although you're not privy to that. Maybe you can give people a snapshot. I mean, you're a renowned researcher, someone that I've looked up to and followed, and actually you trained at the BTTI that I was part of, so I've always admired your work and your style in how you deliver things. But can you talk about a little bit of the research that started this book, which we're going to go into?
Yeah. And again, thank you for having me. This is a topic, as you know, near and dear to my heart. So if we go back 3 decades, we were commiserating in our staff meetings about feeling bad about families that were calling us, and we were turning them away because, we would say what most people would say when they called and said, my husband, my daughter, my father, my mother has the X illness. At the time, it was largely OCD, but we got depression, all the anxiety disorders. It didn't matter. They said, can you do something? Can you help us? And we said, well, no, we can't help you if they don't want help. What are we going to do? And then we would turn them away. And that's kind of what happens mostly still today, unfortunately. And we were commiserating about it and feeling guilty and trying to reassure each other that we were good people. I'm not sure we ever accomplished that, but we did try to reassure each other. And then we started thinking about, well, what could we do? for the families, and it was a very organic process. You couldn't have manufactured it if you tried, but then we started talking about ideas about, well, maybe we could help the family. And, I've always believed in the words of Paul Václavic, you should work with whoever's motivated. And so that really was the key to us starting to talk about what exactly could we do. And we had people suffering. We're supposed to help people suffering. Why are we not helping these people? I mean, that basically was what happened. And then we developed, now, long story short, we developed some procedures. We got a grant to study it. And thank you, International OCD Foundation, for helping us fund that. And we found some things that worked. And we also realized some things we were missing from that study. And then we started adding components to it over time and field testing it with families. And then finally, 3 decades later, the book comes out in May, When a Loved One Won't Seek Mental Health Treatment. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, what happened.
Well, I wanted you to talk about that because of all the research and the decades of work that you put into it before you released this book. And I'm so glad that you released like a layman's book, like you directed it towards the families and the loved ones.
Yes.
Because you could have gone the other way and done like a clinical manual, would have gotten hidden in like research, and only like the little, elite privy, people would be privy to it who want to dive into like some sort of research manual, and then it gets lost and it gets convoluted.
Yeah, no, that was one of the, I mean, we made two huge changes from when we first started. First, we were going to train all these clinicians and make a manual for them. And so we said, no, let's go directly to the families. We're going to help more people that way. And the clinicians can always use the book themselves as well if they want to pitch in and help. And then the second big change was we started, because a lot of our experience was with families of OCD sufferers. And then we started, working with all sorts of different problems, and realized the book should not be about OCD, should be about anybody who is dealing with a family member has one or more mental illnesses and how to deal with it. Because the issues they may be in the weeds, they may be different, but you step back and look at the forest, you see that it's the same major issues that each family is dealing with.
Yeah. And I think that was a smart move, because as far as the family system goes, it is very, very similar. Because I read your book as a therapist and doing what I do, and as a mom to like 3 kids with anxiety and OCD. But then it was really a weird shift. I was actually listening to the audio version, which they found a voice actor who kind of sounds like you, which I thought was, right? Have you listened to it? I was like, I had to go back and be like, I wish they had that for my book, because my voice actor, she does not sound like me. But yeah, I looked back. I was like, did he read his own book? No, but that
was in the contract. You must have an audio reader that sounds like me. And otherwise, plus the caviar and the silk pillows, it was a very intense negotiation with the publisher.
Well, I respect that. And they nailed it. They did nail it. But I was listening to it and I was having more flashbacks about like my own childhood, and I wasn't listening to your book for that, but my dad had bipolar, eventually with psychosis, and our entire life was like navigating his mental health issues and like, suicide attempts and in and out of institutions, and like, just the room was dark. We all had to like all the things. And I never really thought about it until I was reading your book, how like that family system is like the health of the family in general is so impacted. So I do appreciate it. And I was appreciative that you did generalize it, because if you hadn't, and I had the lens of OCD, I wouldn't have really even seen my own childhood through that. And so I think families are going to really appreciate that. And families are hijacked for all sorts of reasons around mental health. And so I think that's really helpful. The number one thing I get, and we'll just dive into some of the things that you talk about in your book. One, I'm just going to say first, is I really appreciated that it wasn't just talking about accommodation for the loved one, there was this balanced effect of helping the family and helping the people that are helping the person who is the identified struggler. And so I do appreciate that, because I was like, well, there's space out there. And I know you've been around way before that, but there's an added layer to this that I thought was just so meaty and in depth, that covered so much more than just give them a letter and then tell them you're not doing accommodations anymore. There was this just whole approach. But we'll take a step back. The number one thing that I get from families, and even I just did a talk recently and I saw, it's so distracting. I was like seeing comments as I'm talking, which I hate that, and sometimes I just don't wear my glasses. But it was something like, if I did what she was saying, my son would end up in the ER. And someone's like, yeah, we can't do that. They're going to go ballistic or they're going to hurt themselves. And that's why I appreciate your first step in your book is prepare for crisis. Because I think loved ones are afraid. They're like hijacked by the threats. They might hurt themselves or other people. So I wonder if you can talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. And it took us a while to realize we needed to pull that up front. We kind of had it integrated into what is now step 4, and realized that, but as we worked with more and more families, we realized the number one reason that families don't follow through with their escape from what we call the family trap. I liked your word hijack. It's a good word for it. But the reason they don't escape is often because the recovery avoider reacts in a way that scares them, intimidates them, and then they understandably fall back into the accommodations and what we call minimizing that is part of the family trap. And so it's completely understandable. And we really wanted to make that point clear in the book, that all these things that people are doing are completely natural. And it's not like they're some deficient person who should have known better, and I'm talking about recovery avoiders and the rest of the family.
Mm-hmm.
It's all right, let's all relax here. We're just human and we're doing what we know to do, and we don't know any better at the time because there's no reason for us to have known better. I didn't take a class in high school on dealing with recovery avoiders, much less I didn't, and certainly not even mental illness. So point being here that if people are not prepared for the crisis, then they are likely to fail. And there's a lot of things that make people hesitant to deal with crises. Now, we emphasize 2 points in our crisis plans. One, keep the family safe as quickly and swiftly as possible. Don't try to figure out whether they really mean it or whether they're going to do something. Act swiftly if you're feeling threatened in any way. And when I say threatened, it could be, sometimes it's physical aggression against the family. Sometimes it's the person threatening suicide. Whatever threat you're feeling, to act on it. Now, the second part, though, is also at the same time, and these two are completely compatible, do as little accommodating and minimizing as possible in the process. That means swiftly talk about going to the emergency room. There's nothing wrong. It's not very pleasant, but it doesn't damage someone to go, and get past the concern about the neighbors and what it'll be embarrassing and all the things that we have to help our families get past. Because when you say, okay, so are you more concerned about what the neighbors will think than rescuing your family from this trap? I mean, it shouldn't even be close, but I get it. It is embarrassing. But we all have to work through that. Once we do, and we're committed to following that crisis plan, we become so much stronger in our ability to deal effectively with the recovery avoider, and not stay up all night coaching them or trying to convince them that life is worth living. That actually, believe it or not, is what we call minimizing. Well, I'm sure we'll get to that, but that actually reinforces this kind of way of dealing with the threat of losing accommodations. And so we don't realize it, but there's a lot of things that have effects that we do, and we just don't realize it. And, we try to make people aware of that in the book.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about minimizing because I think that was probably my biggest aha is like, oh, this cheerleading is a minimizing behavior, which it took me a long time to shift my belief in that. And we'll put a pin in that one because I want to do come back to that.
Sure.
But let's talk about, I wanted to start with the crisis and preparing for the crisis because I knew that was the first thing people they're gonna hear us talk and be like the whole time, nope, but this is gonna happen. So I wanted to get that out there right from the get-go. I think it was good that you moved it to number one
Yeah.
because
Can I say one more thing about that?
yeah, go ahead.
The other idea is there's two things that are limiting in that thinking that, oh, I can't do that because uh, my loved one's going to have, you know, he's going to have a tantrum, or he's going to whatever, he's going to lose it. Two things wrong with that. Secondly, first of all, that if that becomes the reason you don't follow through, then you're really just sort of sentencing yourself to this trap. And the second reason is there's this that a lot of our families are trapped by thinking they control things they can't. And so there's also this delusion that if I keep doing the things I'm doing, that he won't have crises,
Right,
which is ludicrous. And
right.
probably most of the families, some of you listening right now, know better. No, the crises are going to come. And so why not have the crises be on the road to change, to creating the opportunity for the family to do something different rather than being a result of the same old thing over and over again.
Yeah, that is the selling point. Is like you're already one step from a crisis at any given time. So, can we talk about the family trap in general, like what that looks like? Because I think that was a really good. I actually pulled up the download um this morning because I never did that, and I was like, oh, let me see. Whenever I listen to an audiobook, I never get the download, but I do recommend getting the download if anyone listens to the Audible version because um, there was a lot of good stuff in there. And then there was all these resources as well. And there was a list of people who are actually trained in your approach, which I was like, oh, okay, I need to just copy and paste that. Um,
Yeah. It's
because
way
that's,
too short right now, and we're hoping to get more people trained this fall. So
yeah. And I think, I mean, just going back to like having a book out there for the people, therapists will flock. I mean, it's a better way to do it is
yeah.
because we'll be demanding it. Like we need therapists who can walk us through this and that'll be helpful. But let's look at the family trap because I think sometimes people are so immersed in it they don't even really recognize themselves in this trap. What does that look like?
Before we go to the trap, because it's really hard to do verbally.
Yeah,
This is the one part of the description of things. The visual of seeing the diagram, it makes it so much easier
it does.
to present, and it's one of the limits of our audio discussions. But that will overcome that, I'm sure. But if you don't mind, I want to just kind of go over the components of it real quick
Yeah.
before we go into the actual cycle. So you've got recovery avoidance, which is described, which is our name for the process in which people behave in ways opposite of what the pursuit of recovery would be. So it's the counterproductive behaviors that loved ones do when they have a mental illness who aren't recovery approaching. So recovery avoiding is all, and you can see it, family members can see, well, that's not going to get you better, but the person stuck in it doesn't see that.
Mhm.
And certainly not, if they do, not as clearly as the rest of the family can see it. So that's recovery avoidance. Want to be clear, very important. Recovery avoidance is not referred to the intention of the person with the mental illness. They are not trying to be ill, and they're certainly not trying to impair the rest of the family. It is the avoidance is the result of the behavior, and those behaviors are driven by other psychological factors that we understand in the field, and have nothing to do with willfulness or laziness or anything like that. there are real factors that drive that behavior, just like it drives the illness itself. And no one is doing this on purpose. So I just want to make sure that's clear. So
Yeah.
recovery avoidance is simply an objective description of the result of the behavior. It ends up with them not achieving recovery. Now, people respond to the recovery avoidance. There are two main strategies that families use to deal with it, both of them natural. First one is accommodation. We can call that helping or assisting. So it's natural when someone is suffering to help them, to assist them. But the problem is that if the person is recovery avoidant, that helping and assisting is going to create a system of interactions between the family that is going to lead them into a trap. Because if it's helping and assisting someone, and the best example I can give is if you make a loan to a friend of yours who's trying to get through the last semester of college, and it's always a little iffy to loan friends money. If you've got the right person who isn't recovery avoidant, then they get the job after they graduate, they put a payment plan together, and they pay you reliably every month, and you are even better friends than you ever were. But if that person you loan the money to is something like recovery avoidant, then you don't hear from them for a while. Maybe they make a payment, but it's not the full payment. You start calling them and bugging them about, hey, where's my money? And so that's what we call minimizing, which I'm get to next. So it's not that there's anything irrational or wrong about the behavior that families are doing. It's just that it's the wrong thing with the wrong person, with the wrong issue that they're having to deal with. So what happens is the more you accommodate, the more they depend on you accommodating, the more even entitled they become. And the level of entitlement for some recovery avoiders is remarkable. And I'm sure some of your families out there can testify, and it becomes a cycle. So the more you avoid recovery, the more they accommodate, the more you accommodate. What happens with accommodation, I know probably most of your listeners know this by now, but just to make it clear, you're reinforcing the disability because number one, you're taking away what could be the motivation for them to get help, because it's the suffering that makes us get help to think about changing. So when you're blunting the suffering, you're taking away the normal motivation that all of us need when we go to the doctor. Nobody goes to the doctor to be a better person. And I've always made the exception. Okay, some people in California go to a doctor to be a better person. I used to live there, so I can say that.
There you go.
All right. But most of us go because we're hurting. And when you take the hurt away artificially, you're taking away the motivation to get help and seek recovery. The second thing is you're taking away opportunities. If you do my laundry, I'm never going to learn how to do it. And so you're taking away the opportunities to learn what we would call recovery behavior. Recovery behavior is anything that moves a person towards higher functioning and being able to do things successfully. And that's what we call recovery behavior. So that's the first cycle, is recovery avoidance, accommodation, and then those two interact. The next thing that's happening is that when you accommodate, you're going to feel burdened. And when you feel burdened, you're going to get, and maybe I'm underestimating this a little bit, cranky, perhaps. Is that too strong a word? Well, let's just say you're not going to be at your best. Let's just put it that way. And just for all of you that see yourself in this description, that crankiness, that irritability, it's normal. It's natural if you accommodate. It's hard not to do that, not to feel that way. But when you do, you behave in ways that aren't always the best in terms of making change happen. So you start to say things that are a little snarky. Maybe you get mad or irritated, or as we were talking earlier, maybe you go on the positive side and try to cheer people up and coach them. And so just to test the audience to see if those strategies, whether it's minimizing, oh, lecturing, that's one of my favorites. I mean, I did that with my kids all the time. And for some reason, they were not appreciative of the brilliance of my lectures. So I thought they were the best I've ever done, but they apparently were not impressed. So pop quiz for your audience. When you go and you lecture the recovery avoider in your life or nag them, whatever, they say, true or false, why, thank you, mother and father. I find that very refreshing and enlightening. And I know it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I know you're just saying it for my own good. And all of a sudden I see things clearly. I must get help. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, true or false, that is the response. Well, all right. Well, I'm thinking most of your audience probably passed that pop quiz.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not. They react negatively. Well, you're trying to do something to help them. Well, okay. But you understand that what you're doing is when you minimize, and that's what we call minimizing. And we call it minimizing because the person doing it is trivializing the power of the forces that make the recovery avoider act the way they do. There are real reasons, the emotions that are stirring in them, belief systems that are misguided but very strongly held by them, skill deficits that they simply don't have. There's all these real behavioral factors that we understand in behavioral and psychological practice, but the average person is not getting it, so they just think it's willfulness. Well, at any rate, so now you're communicating to the person who is the recovery avoider that you don't get it. You think you can just talk me out of this. So that raises their anxiety and raises their distrust of being around the family. So what do? Often will stay away from the family more, isolate more because they don't feel comfortable around them. They don't feel that they trust them, that they understand what's going on. Now, I'm not saying the recovery avoider's perspective is correct in some objective way, but that's how they experience it. And so now you've got more anxiety, more defensiveness, and anger. So you're creating more conflict in the family because then of course, they jump back and snap back at you. You're creating more fear and distrust, which makes them more defensive and more likely to engage in recovery avoidance. So you have this next cycle between minimizing and the recovery avoider's reaction and more recovery avoidance. And so I know our listeners can't see the graph, but you've got sort of three wings. You've got the avoidance dealing with that's reinforcing the recovery avoidance. Then you've got the burden that is coming from the minimizing that is from the accommodating that's making them minimize more. And then you have another cycle between minimizing interaction between the recovery avoider and the minimizer. So all of that, your audience will just have to trust me. It all fits together into a diagram that sort of depicts how everything affects everything else in the system. So everybody is trapped and no one knows how to get out. That's why we call it the family trap, because they keep doing the same things over and over again because they don't know what else to do, or they're afraid to do something different, and which you touched on with folks who are afraid of the crises, understandably.
Yeah. And I think the minimizing part, like I said before, I thought was the most interesting when I was reading it, because often as loved ones, we don't see our role in it, minus maybe feeding the accommodation, certainly with OCD. Like, parents will say to me, I have to, buy all this soap, or I have to wash down this, I have to wash the doorknob before he goes into the bathroom, or he won't pee, So, and they recognize that that's the first thing we talk about when they come into my community is obviously, you're part of the OCD compulsion loop. And so they get that, they can clearly see that. But then the nuance thing that you brought up which actually I didn't even really think about as much, is this minimizing. And minimize to me was like a bad word. Like I'm minimizing it, like just do it. Or, but then the positive minimizing was, I guess, a new perspective for me too. And that I feel like that parents are going to resonate with that because we're carrying their journey. I mean, I often say to parents, you're one piece of the puzzle. You're on your parent journey. Your child's on their journey. You can't hijack their journey, jump ship and go into their lane. I mean, we all would love to do that, but like you don't have the power to do that. And so I feel like there's so much cheerleading going on. And then pivot to the irritation. And you highlight that so well in your book of like, you can do this, you've done brave things, come on, let's just get your shoes on. You can go to school today or whatever. And then you're going to be late for work or whatever. And then you're like, I can't do this all the time. And, you move into that irritation. And I think the parents feel like Jekyll and Hyde. They're like,
It's
and
a
then they
great
feel,
metaphor for it.
yeah. And you feel guilty, your kid eventually goes to school or they don't, and then you're like, I'm the worst parent ever. And then you go to bed feeling upset and the cycle just rinse and repeat over and over again.
Yes. Yeah, that was a very great depiction of it. And Jekyll and Hyde is a great metaphor for it. Yeah, because and you're right. We tried to help people understand that sometimes even things that seem like it's positive. And so we didn't define minimizing as just being angry or irritable. It's anything you do that to try to change the recovery avoider. And here's the key, that doesn't work. This is really an important thing because look, if you cheer up your depressed family member and they kind of, hey, I feel better, thanks. And they use that lift in mood to do things more, and then it works. And you're not back having to do it every 24 hours.
Yeah.
Then that has worked. So the key is that minimizing doesn't work, whether it's negative or positive. And in fact, so this is really an important part of this process is sometimes you're just trying to not do more harm.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always, am I doing good? It's first stop doing harm. And that's what step 4 is a lot about, is want to get you to stop doing all these things that are making things actually worse and for everybody. And the focus is on what the family members can control. And the serenity prayer is a big part of what we call family well-being.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful
I realized that it was helpful to do like the exposures before. It was like really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before, there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Yeah, and it's really just that acceptance and grief, and then figuring out what your role is. Because I do feel like that, particularly with parents, there's this ownership of like, my child's mental health is my problem, it's my fault, and then it's my responsibility to fix it, where really we don't have the ability to completely 100% fix things, but we get into these loops. So your second step is redefining the problem. And we won't go through all your steps because really you have to read the book and really dive into these. We won't do it justice. I wasn't reading actually at all. I was listening to your book, and I was trying to think of it through the lens of like how the parents in my community would perceive it. And then I kept bouncing back to my dad, so it was bringing up all the stuff, which is a sign of a good book, I think. But then I was thinking, you spent the initial part, you talk a lot about the parent. Well, I was viewing it as a parent. Obviously, it's a loved one, any loved one. And at first I got uncomfortable with it because I was like, and I guess I'm a mom to 3 kids with anxiety and OCD too. Although ironically, I wasn't always looking at it from that lens. And there was this guilt of like, well, I don't want to focus on me, because that's not why I'm reading this. Like, I need to help my loved one. And I'm feeling like people will also have that effect. But why is it important to start with the family and how they're doing?
Well, I have this wild belief that if you have 5 people in a family, all of their well-being are important, not just the one who has an illness. So I know it's a wild, controversial stance.
It's pretty radical.
Like, everybody in the family is important and their mental health is important. I also take the stance when we started doing this work, because a lot of people would say, well, how do you know you're going to be able to help the person who has the illness? And my answer is, I don't know that. But I don't know who I'm going to be helped, but we don't know that. Anytime we take a patient in our caseload, we don't know if we're going to be able to help. We believe we can. We have strategies that have been well tested, but in any individual case, we don't know. What my goal is to help as many people in the family as I can. And if that includes the person with recovery avoidance, great. But if I just help 1 or 2 others of the family have a better life, even if I haven't helped the person with recovery avoidance, then I've got 2 more family members with a better life than I would have had I not helped them. So now, let me be clear. My goal is to help everybody in the family if we can. But a lot of times, families when they go through this tough process that you're talking about of having to accept what they can't control, they're having to shift their thinking about, stop comparing the current situation to their ideal, because that's terribly unfair to everyone in the family to do that, but to compare their current situation to what might be possible. And then as they make improvements, to not diminish the improvements they make because it's not perfect yet, but to really appreciate the fact, oh my gosh, Johnny's coming to the dinner table now. He's still a pain in the butt at times, but he's talking, and he's, or hey, he's doing more. He's not in treatment, but he's doing more things around the house. He's making his own lunch and whatever. And that's what happens often when you start reversing recovery avoidance. It doesn't, like, the next morning, they're at McLean Hospital. It's these more gradual changes towards recovery that the families we work with will come back and report. And sometimes I have to remind them. I've got one family that the recovery avoider just started treatment. And they're all worried that he's not really fully engaged in the treatment and I'm going, oh, hold on. Okay, that's a reasonable worry. Where was your, what was your son a year ago? Well, okay, he was completely disabled, didn't do anything around the house, and swore he would never get treatment because all those doctors are quacks. And that's a slight exaggeration. I think only half the doctors are quacks, but that we won't go into that. But at any rate, and so they had to pause and go, yeah, we wouldn't even be having. He's in therapy now. So it's that's another thing we do throughout the book is sort of remind people to appreciate smaller goals, but really follow through. Like even when they change accommodations, it's better to do smaller changes and follow through than to have these ambitious things that you're not going to be able to follow through with, and to appreciate and really notice the changes as they naturally, really, truly occur in families. You're lucky or rare if you have these dramatic improvements. It's gradual over time.
I think it's a good shift in perspective as far as diving into your book and diving into your approach, that the way that it's going, the family trap, that cycle that they're on, it's not good for anybody.
No.
And that no one's having a full life. The other kids aren't having a full life. The parents aren't having a full life. And it's not making things better. No one's getting better by participating in this trap. And so I think what your book does is it makes the system better. I'm a social worker, so I always see things in systems, but it's
Sure.
making the system healthier, and you are improving the quality of life for family members, and we're approaching the loved one I always say, like, become lovingly detached, and some people don't like that term when I always say that, but it's like, how do you anchor yourself and respond to your loved one in a way that is effective for your own mental health and effective for their mental health? And that's really, the expectation is, I'm not going to do these, because I think that people have this expectation with space, to be honest. Like, I'm going to do these things and then they're going to get clinically better because that's what the research says. And what I like about your approach in your book is it may or may not, hopefully it does, but I'm certainly not going to add to this. I'm not going to play my part in making the dysfunction worse. And I'm also going to have a better quality of life because, to be honest, some people are going to be chronically ill. I think about my dad, and like, my mom was the minimizer. She was either yelling at him or she was, putting like protein shakes near the bed when he was like depressed. And, there was 4 kids in that cycle that never got care or treatment or didn't have a good quality of life. And healing that and helping that and addressing that, it's so critical, I think.
I couldn't agree more. We were talking about the redefining the problem, meaning let's look at the impact of recovery avoidance on your life, family members. How is it affecting you? And what can we do because, hey, if you can't escape the trap, how do you expect the person with the mental illness to escape it?
Right.
And so chapter 4, way back on the part of the book that's on the things you need to know, addresses the very thing you were referring to, some of the beliefs. We anticipate the obstacles, first of all, that before they even start, that you might encounter. And we discuss obstacles that the recovery avoider will present. We talk about the obstacles that maybe other family members who might unintentionally or intentionally sabotage what you're trying to do. And then obstacles that you might present. And I don't mean you, Natasha.
But it could be. You don't know.
It sounded very personal. But you meaning the reader of the book. And so we go into the belief systems that we heard over the years, the reasons people say that they don't want to do some of the things that we recommend they do, and things like, I think you even said something very similar, like it's selfish for me to think about myself when my loved one is suffering, and there's so many errors in that way of thinking. And we use the analogy of the flight attendant telling you to put your oxygen mask on before you give it to your child. And how are you best equipped to deal with a very difficult challenge of dealing with a recovery avoider when you yourself are so stressed, your well-being is so compromised? That's not the maximum level. We use the analogy of the anvil on your back, and you're trying to swim with an anvil on your back. And the more that you can get better well-being for yourself, you now are better able to cope and deal and even help the loved one who is a recovery avoider. So at any rate, so we have, I think it's 7 or 8 or whatever it is, like most common misguided beliefs that reinforce recovery avoidance, So, or I shouldn't have to be the one to change, Okay, should. We all know it. By the way, those of you, if you ever want to make rattle your therapist, say the word should. They hate that. They break out into a rash, and I don't know. It's just, but it's fun to shake them up. Just say I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't, and you'll get an immediate response. You'll be corrected like that.
Probably. Yeah. Don't shit all over me. Yep. I don't want that.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah. So I like the way that the first step is like focus on what you've lost, in your life as a loved one. What things do you need to get back? And even really doing some behavioral work on like, what activity are you going to start to do? Let's chart this. Let's write it down. There's a lot of work done on the loved one, which to me, I just haven't seen before, that to be seen. I think people are going to feel seen in this. Like, this book is taking care of me. Like, I'm also the focus of this book, because so many parents that I talk to have lost everything. They've lost friendships. They lost any extracurricular activity. Some have lost spouses or their partners, relationships, family members, not going to Christmas events. They're living literally hijacked in their home. And so I love how you shine a light on that. Like, let's start with that. How do you get your life back? Because you just living in this dysfunction it's not actually helping your loved one, and it's definitely not helping you.
Yeah, that's so after we redefine the problem, then we start looking at, step 3, which is the accommodations of omission. If people haven't heard that term, there's a good reason, because we made it up.
I like it.
Yeah, but so don't go looking it up and go, oh, why don't I know that? But all that means is the things that have left your life that used to bring you joy or meaning or replenishment. And so we try to work on those first after you've redefined the problem, to try to get some of those back. And that's sort of a precursor to then going to step 4, which is a little more of the stuff that it more often will create some challenges with the recovery avoider.
And I do like is it step 4 where you write the letter and you like kind of talk to them about this is what's going to be happening next week. And and the aspect that I liked about that was also the ownership of like what I'm going to do. Like there was like, I'm sorry that I've minimized. I'm kind of stuck on the minimize because I feel like that's an interesting thing, these are the things that I'm going to do in response to your struggle from now on. And so it really felt more even. It didn't feel like this intervention attack of like, starting next week, there'll be no toilet paper for you. It was like, it was very compassionate. And it, some of the ownership was also on the loved one of like, these are the things that I'm going to do.
Yes. And in fact, there's nothing in those plans in any step of the way about what the recovery avoider is supposed to do. It's all about what the family members are going to do or not do. And that comes back to the serenity prayer. You don't have any power to say, now, from now on, you better stop doing blah, 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 and the problem with setting limits for what, now set limits for what you will tolerate and what you will do, but setting limits for what the recovery avoider will do, what are you going to do about it if they don't comply? Are you ready to do the negative? Because generally you're now going to be talking about punishment. and the potential, if you take that to extreme, is kicking them out of the house or whatever, which a lot of people associate with tough love. We generally don't recommend that except in very special circumstances. For example, if the family is at risk with having the person in the house, when their safety and welfare is because of perhaps physical aggression or whatever. But other than that, there's a good reason not to get all tough and kick them out of the house. And besides the conflict, the safety risk to the recovery avoider, generally people don't follow through with these dramatic, draconian things. Yeah. One call from the homeless shelter and they're down picking them up and bringing them back home. And every time you don't follow through, number one, you haven't done the thing you set to do, and you've now lost credibility. Because each time you make proclamations and you don't do it, you lose just one more ounce of credibility with the recovery avoider, which means the next thing you try to announce you're going to do is going to be defied or tested even more because they don't believe you that you're going to really follow through.
Right. Yeah. So you just water down everything. So definitely. I just want to ask you one more question, minimizing first, before we wrap up. So if someone is, and this is probably just because I think parents will probably ask this, like if someone's struggling, like let's say they're having a hard time, eating because they feel like you touched their food and now it's contaminated or whatever. Yeah. What would be an example of a non-minimizing response?
To now say that again, to touching the food, to preparing their food? Or...
Yeah, and I just wanted to come up with like a really concrete hypothetical just to wrap it up because.
Well, I can give you one. This would just be sort of so in step 4, they put together our goal is to reduce the minimizing and the accommodations of commission, the things they do that burden them, and begin to gradually reduce that. We want them to try to reduce the minimizing as quickly as possible, but they're human. We're not expecting them to be able to just stop it. So let's say we do this family well-being plan, and in that plan, they identify a problem situation. The rest of the family is waiting for the person with OCD to get out of the room so they can go to dinner. And the whole family is being held up by the person doing rituals in their home. And so in the recovery plan, we would say, what's the problematic situation? And basically, the problematic situation, those are those little snippets of situations in which all the dynamics occur. And so Johnny's late, he won't come out of the room, everybody's getting irritated, they're mad at him because they want to go to dinner. So mom or dad goes upstairs and coaches Johnny, and then he gets frustrated, and then they get into it and they're arguing. And then the culmination is they either end up going to dinner an hour late and everybody's ticked off and mad, or they don't go to dinner. They give up and they just stay there. None of those are good for anybody in the family. So the alternative would be to take that situation and say, all right, I'm going to treat you better, meaning the recovery avoider, and I'm going to treat me better. How I'm going to treat you better is I'm going to stop pestering you, lecturing you, and yelling at you about getting ready. I'm going to stop treating that. It's just you that way. It's disrespectful, and it just creates more conflict with us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, I'll let you know ahead of time what time we're leaving. I'll give you, if you want, a 10-minute warning or a 15-minute warning. And how I'm going to treat me better is that if you're not ready, rather than yell and pester you, I'm just going to go without you. I'll bring you back some takeout if you want. But what I'm not going to do is wait for you and get irritated. And the reason is because then I treat you disrespectfully when I do that. And I also treat myself disrespectfully because I'm not getting fed when I want to be. And now that affects my emotional health and my physical health. So that's how everybody wins here. Now the recovery avoider may not like that he's missing out on dinner, but actually I think you might find in some of these situations, they find that preferable to be rather than being under the gun and pressured by the rest of the family to to behave in a way that the person doesn't know how to behave.
Yeah. And that was a really good example. I wanted to just give people like a visual of what that looks like in action. And that was a perfect example, because I feel like it's putting some of it on. It sounds good when you say it, like, I don't want to yell at you, and I don't want to, it's not, I apologize for that. And I don't want to have that relationship with you. It lands well with me, where I feel like it is respectful, and it doesn't help it, because sometimes parents will think, well, I can't just leave him, then it's just not fair, and he's got issues. And it's like, but yelling or even cheerleading, you can do this, you got this, this pressure isn't always therapeutic or good for the relationship. And it becomes that vicious cycle. So,
yeah. And you find that probably Johnny would get done with his rituals a lot quicker if you guys go ahead and go to dinner than if you stay there waiting for him in the living room, because that adds more pressure and anxiety about it. And bring him takeout. Look, this is the thing. It's sometimes the nuance gets missed. Like, okay, you can scale back accommodations without having to dramatically stop them. So when you bring him dinner, that's an accommodation, right? You could say, well, if you're not ready, I'm not bringing, which is fine. If you can't bring him dinner without resentment, then don't do it. This is the change in thinking that's really hard to make that shift. It's always looking back at you and saying, checking yourself out, and am I resentful when I do this? And our goal is to reduce that resentment over time so that you're not resentful, and that becomes the meter, as opposed to what's the recovery avoiding doing or not doing.
Yeah, I love that. It's like that shift on focusing on yourself. Well, everybody should grab a copy of your book. It is, I'm assuming, where books are sold. I saw it on Amazon, Audible,
Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Yeah, everywhere. I'm out on the street most of the time selling it one at a time.
We'll look for you.
Whoever walks by. So you might see me if you're in St. Louis. You might see me on the streets.
We'll look for you. I will leave a link in the show notes. I definitely recommend people get this. If you are overwhelmed and can't read a book, listen to the audio version. It's really good as well. And then you can get those charts and things and take back your life. I think one step at a time. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, I hope that you found that as interesting as I did. I could talk to him all day, because honestly, like I said, when I've been in trainings, sometimes it can be a little bit tedious, but his delivery and his insight and his awareness, and he's very funny as well, is very captivating. And everything he says makes sense to me. And he works with, I think, the hardest issue when it comes to mental health, which is when we have a recovery avoider. That's the hardest part, because we're ready to go and we want to do things, and our loved one is not doing anything. That is hard. And so I think that's the hardest aspect of this journey. So I will leave a link in the show notes to grab his book, When a Loved One Won't Seek Mental Health Treatment. So you can grab that. It's on Amazon, wherever you like to buy your books. Don't forget to sign up for the free series that's coming out on Thursday. It is at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. We will walk you through where you're at, where your child is at, and where is the best thing to focus on at this moment, and what are the ingredients that you need to create a therapeutic home environment. And Alec Pollard's book is definitely a key component. Read that and soak up that information, and then take the free series, or you might have to do it both at the same time because it's happening on Thursday, and start to apply these things, because no matter how bad your situation is, there is always something that we can do to make it better. And I hope that you get that message through these resources. If you have been enjoying the podcast, don't forget to hit a star and rate it wherever you consume your podcast. That does actually really help the show. If you have a little extra time and want to pay it forward, leaving a review does help other parents, and it helps people find the show. And I can't remember if I read this review last time, so I'm just going to read both of them because I have zero memory. But I want to thank Mommy Jen 2007. I feel like I did not read this. Very helpful and practical advice. My daughter was recently diagnosed with OCD. This podcast has been very helpful. I appreciate the practical advice and was able to join the AT parenting community. Yay! Well, I'm excited to get to know you better over in the AT parenting community and give you some more in-depth support. And I also want to thank Blast Lover, who wrote, "Thank you, very useful, helped me a lot, thank you," from the UK. So I appreciate you both taking time out of your day to write a review. And maybe if you write a review, I'll be reading yours next time. Don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. And I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.